In this lesson, we're going to talk about the different parts of a C++ program, looking again at our Hello World program that we created in the last lesson. We're going to start at the very top. And at the very top, excuse me while I adjust it up a little bit. At the very top, the first part is just a comment. A comment always starts with two green slashes, or a comment can always start with two green slashes. And a comment just is something that you want to write to either yourself or to someone reading the program. It's just a note to yourself. In this case, this comment is identifying the program. The compiler ignores all comments, so you don't have to worry about making mistakes here. Just make sure that you start the comment with a double slash. Next, we have what are called the preprocessor directives. I'm going to highlight those for you right now. These are special commands that tell the compiler to add functionality from an external library. The first one, #include open quote stdafx.h close quote, is a special Microsoft preprocessor directive that you wouldn't necessarily use with a different type of C++ compiler. The second one, #include open angle bracket iostream close angle bracket, is a general C++ preprocessor, I'm sorry, a general C++ library that indicates that we want to use a function or the functionality of the iostream library, which gives us the ability to write data out to the console and read data in from the keyboard, amongst other things. C++ is a fairly small core language, and the creators of C++ did that on purpose to make the language very efficient. And then the added functionality that you might need, say, to read from the console or write to the console, or to read a file or write to a file. Those types of things are provided by libraries, and you add a preprocessor directive for every library that you need. Another example might be math functions like square root, things like that. After the preprocessor directives is a line that says using namespace standard, or STD, semicolon. This is saying that we want to use the standard namespace. Namespaces are used to avoid collisions in names or conflicts in names. So for example, the iostream library and another library might have functions that are declared with the same name or created with the same name. By separating them out into namespaces or putting them in separate namespaces, we make sure that we don't have any name collisions, that's what they're called, or conflicts where we have two names that the compiler can't figure out which use we want for that name. We'll be using, we'll be talking more about namespaces later. The next part of the program is really the main part of the program. And it is a function, and it's really called the main function. In Microsoft, they write the main function using an _t. We could very easily take that out. In fact, in a lot of situations, I will take that out to where it just looks like int main. Now, the int part simply means that as a function, main has to return a value. And the value that main will return will be an integer value, or int. Int is the name of a data type that represents whole numbers. We'll be talking a lot more about data types later on. For now, just recognize that's what it is. It's saying that main is going to return a integer value. And actually, I'm going to jump down. If you see this return 0, that's what main returns, which is a 0, meaning that the program ended successfully or normally. Going back up to the first line, inside main, the parentheses by main are what we call function arguments. Now, these are not strictly needed for just a basic C++ program, so I'm also going to take those out. And later on we'll talk about how to modify the template that Visual Studio uses so that you don't have to see this all the time. So for now we're just going to leave the arguments out. And arguments to a function are simply pieces of data that we're adding to the function so that the function can use them. But in this case we don't need them. Next you see an open curly brace. A function must have an open and closing curly brace. Those represent what's called a block, and all function definitions are declared or defined inside of a block. So we have an open curly brace to indicate the beginning of a block and a closed curly brace to indicate the end of the block. Next we have our first statement in the program, cout, and then the output operator, hello world. So let's break that down a little bit. Cout is a part of the IOStream library, and it is an object that represents the standard output device, which is your monitor or your screen. So some people call it console out or standard output, but we'll just say cout. Next we have what's called the output operator, which is two less than signs put together. We use those symbols to represent a flow, like a stream, so that what happens is we are streaming the text hello world to the standard output device. So the output operator is kind of used as a way to represent that streaming. Remember, the library that cout comes from is called IOStream, for input output stream, and that's how data is sent to a device like an output device, and that's via a stream. So after the output operator we have the actual phrase that we wanted to display, hello world, and notice it's inside quotes. That means it's a string, which is just how we represent textual data in C++, is by putting it inside quotes. We'll be talking a lot more about that later. Then we have the semicolon, which is used to represent the end of the statement. That's how the compiler knows that we're at the end of the statement, and that's one functional or processing unit, the statement. And so at that point, when the compiler sees a semicolon, it knows that we can go ahead and it can go ahead and parse and figure out what to do with what we've written. You can think of a semicolon somewhat like the period in English when we separate our sentences by periods. That's so we can understand when a thought has been completed is when the writer uses a period. Semicolons perform somewhat the same function. And then last we have the return 0. That simply indicates that our program is ended correctly or normally. The 0 is a code for normal end of execution. And we'll talk more about how programs would end unnormally or abnormally later on. Then of course there's a closing curly brace to indicate that's the end of the block and the end of the definition of our main function. That's all we need to have to run the program. I'll run it again, just like we did in the last lesson, by holding down Control F5 so that our console window will stay up on the monitor. So we should see hello world, followed by press any key to continue. Take it just a moment to compile. There it is, and there's our output. And so that ends this lesson on what I might call the minimal parts of every C++ program.